So today I hope to have something new for you that's actually really fun to watch. I'm actually gonna give you a look inside my brain while building a website. No, for real. We're going to build Linear's homepage with Next.js, Tailwind, and the new app directories in Next.js 13. So instead of a rather short video, this video will probably be a little bit longer because we're going to build the full homepage and try to add in as many details as possible within a reasonable amount of time. So for those who haven't seen the Linear website before, it has been all over Twitter in the past few weeks, so you might have seen it already, but you can see it on the right as well. It's a really nice website with a lot of really nice gradients, glossy textures, a lot of nice animations, which we hopefully can add in at least a few already, but there are so many details in here, it's probably impossible to add all of them in a short-ish video. Oh, and by the way, this is editing me. I'm actually now coming to the conclusion that rebuilding this takes a lot of recording and a lot of time. So this video is actually split in multiple parts, where the first part is what you're watching right now. So in this video, we're making sure that we set everything up and we're gonna build the main navigation, the footer, and a little bit of styling in between. And from the next video on, which gets released in next week, we will start on building all of the homepage components itself. Back to the video. But in general, it's just a really nice and sexy website with a lot of details, and I even heard some people say that it's impossible to build really detailed and complicated websites with a lot of attention to detail and design. And actually, I used to be one of them before as well. I'm going to show you this is definitely possible to create. So let's dive in and build this together. On the right side, I already created a new Next.js app with Tailwind included. And for that, I actually used their example you can find on their GitHub. And it's actually pretty straightforward to install this. You can install it by running any of these 3 commands to create a new app that already has Tailwind included, which just gets you started a little bit faster. If we start up this empty project, this is actually what it looks. There's quite a lot of work to do still. So let's go ahead and build this. The way we're going to build this is by looking at their website and trying to extract values like it was designed. So I'll try to look as little as possible at the code they used to build this, but I of course will inspect elements to get things like font sizes, colors, different gradients, just like a designer would also hand over to me in Figma. And from that point on, we try to create all of the HTML ourselves, and hopefully we even come up with a different way of writing certain components than the Linear engineers have done themselves. Because you can build things in different ways, right? So let's see what we come up with. So the first thing I usually do when I start with a new project is make sure that at least I have the right font already set up, because that changes a lot in, for example, the amount of spacing letters take up, and for example, the height and width of buttons and navigations and everything that's involved with sizing. So if we inspect this H1, we see that they use their own proprietary font, but that's not something I'm going to download and copy right now because that's probably a font they own, so I don't want to get any copyright claims or anything like that. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to click on this and copy all of the other font definitions they've done. They're actually, as a second fallback font, they have supplied San Francisco Pro Display, which is a native Mac font that's included with your Mac. So if you're a Mac user, that will actually be the font that's used. For Tailwind, you can add these overrides in your Tailwind config. We can add font family in here, and then add the sans serif font. And by doing that, we at least know that we have a font that's pretty close to what Linear is using, which is good enough for this rebuild. The next thing I also like to do in the beginning of a project is also make sure that the background color is also set up properly, because that already starts bringing in some brand vibes, right? So we can also copy that right away from their website, and then add in a colors property in the Tailwind config, where for now I'm just gonna call this background because I'm actually unsure if there's any other black color towards the future we're going to use, or if this has any reuse value. So as soon as we've added that color, we can open the global CSS file, and we can actually extend the base layer by setting the style of the HTML node to apply BG and background. The next thing that's important is also making sure that we apply the right fonts, which we can also do on the HTML node by setting font sans and text white to also apply the text color. So why this default I take for now, but later on we decide if that was a smart decision or not. But this way we can at least see some texts. So after that, I'm gonna reserve a little bit of space for the different types of components we will have in a second. So that means that we will get a header component. We have the main section of our app, which contains the full page, and we will have a footer soon as well. As soon as we've done that, you also see that all of the content, like in most of the websites, is actually positioned towards the center of the page. Especially if you have a bigger resolution browser, you will see that everything will stay in the center. So the next component we will need is a more container component to set like a max width for everything. I will create this component in components, container.tsx. This component for now will be a div that only renders children. And these children are then passed in as props. And if we inspect this page, we see that they actually set a max width on these divs equal to a variable. And that variable is 1200 pixels. So for now, we are going to add this hard-coded to the page because I'm not sure if we will need that again. So I'm not making variables for things I don't know yet that we're going to reuse. And now I've added this in, I'm also noticing that I did not set up any value for the root HTML node yet, because instead of pixels, I actually don't want to use pixels, but REM, like you could see in a video I shared earlier. Link up there or there. So what we still need to do is define a font size for the HTML node that equals 62.5%. This way, instead of using 1200 pixels, we can use 120 REM. And then it actually should be a max width and not a width. And then add MX Auto to center this div. And as soon as we've done that, we can add this container component around our header and other components for now. Probably later we will move them to the components. And we see that our component is nicely centered. So after I've done that, I most of the time want to scaffold out a little bit of content for the homepage. And then I will start at the main navigation and footer navigation to have a finish and end of a page. I was thinking that this would be some kind of hero component, but then it looks pretty similar to what's used multiple times on the page as well. Although perhaps it's only the big title that is the same. So for now, I'm going to turn this into a hero component, which we add in components, hero.tsx. And this hero takes in a few props, hero props, it's a title, subtitle. And I don't think I will add in the button yet, because I can imagine that down the road you will add perhaps multiple buttons, or maybe want to do some more complicated stuff in the hero. And if we added it as props, it would restrict the way we could use this hero component. So for now, we only have a div, and of course we need to pull in these props. And then for now, we render out this title and the subtitle, where the subtitle actually should not be in H2 here, because this is part of the page's content, and it's not, if you think in a way a book is structured, it's not like a sub-chapter of the H1. So that's why this should not be in H2. And if we then render this hero component and add the title as well as the subtitle, we already see something. So next up is making sure that we also have the right font sizes for these things. If we look at the computed property, we see that this is an 80 pixel title. So if we go back to our Tailwind config, we can add some font sizes in here as well. By default, Tailwind supplies font sizes ranging from extra small all the way up to 9 extra large. And if you're building a real website, you probably don't want to have all these different sizes also sticking around while you're actually not using them. So perhaps you only have maybe 6 font sizes, and if you'd leave all the other ones in there, people will start using them as well, and that will make your design a little bit less consistent. So instead of extending the theme, I'm actually going to remove the extend now. That means that we're not inheriting all of the defaults Tailwind already supplies, but rather are creating our own. We will still use pretty much the same notation, but this way at least there's no sizes sticking around that are unused or not part of our design system. So if we quickly have a look throughout the page as well, to see what different kind of font sizes there are, that it seems that this is the biggest font size that is out there on the page. But there is quite a few smaller variants as well. So we should at least pick something that's a pretty high extra large number. So for now, I'm going to define 5XL as 8 REM, which is the 80 pixels we saw in the design. And we see that its font size is 22 pixels. And if we scroll down the page, it feels like this is the main body text size. Whereas probably this text is a bit smaller. Yeah, that's 16 pixels. And this is also 16 pixels. So it actually feels like 16 pixels is the main body text size. So this one should still be one step up. Let's quickly check the button as well. That one is also 16 pixels. So we're going to define the large as 2.2 REM. So we have one step down, or multiple steps down, of course, but medium will be 16 pixels, which will eventually be our base font size we use for regular body text. And of course, usually you would have a design where hopefully your design already created a nice overview of all the different font sizes used. So you already know which different sizes are there, and you don't need to guess the number of steps that are in between, because the chances are big that eventually we need to change this 5XL to a 4XL, for example, because there's less variance. But that's what happens if you either don't have a designer that creates a perfect overview for you, or you need to extract everything from the website and don't want to spend hours up front to find all of the different sizes used. So for now, we're gonna add these class names on there, text 5XL and text large. Oh, right. And we were, of course, already using text white in our base layer to define the text color, which is now gone because we don't extend the colors anymore either. So we have to add that back in. And as soon as we do that, at least that's working again. So a few more tweaks I also want to do is already make this centered as well. And what you also see is that our text expands way further than theirs. And what they actually did is they added a line break in between, which if you really want to make your design look very nice, that's of course the best thing to do, because this way you have control where the line breaks. Whereas if you input it as a string, which could be the case if you work with CMS, for example, that's way harder to do, because usually it's then only a text field and not a field where you can input HTML. So for now, I'm going to ignore this, and let's see if we down the road want to build something that's actually similar to this, because there's more of these really nice titles, which of course would look slightly different if they didn't use line breaks in there, I guess. Yeah, there's also a line break in here. So probably makes sense to split this into components. And actually, let's do it right away while we're at it. So instead of turning these props from a string into a React node, for example, it is actually a better idea to remove these properties completely and add in a children property, and then copy these out and create new components from them in a second, which we call hero title. That also takes in children as a prop, because then we can insert HTML as well. And I'm not going to reuse this hero props interface in the title, because I think down the road the hero will have more props and the title only needs children. So we're actually going to create hero element props, because I will reuse it for the title and subtitle, which also has children for now. And the same thing we do for hero subtitle. And as soon as we did that, instead of rendering the attributes here, we're now going to render children. Hero title, which takes in this title and gives us then the ability to add a line break in here. And the same for the hero subtitle, which actually also has a line break after development. Then remove the unused props. And hooray, we're pretty much at the same place, but the line breaks are in the right location. And actually, it looks so much nicer, but it took a bit of effort, of course. And the biggest benefit of using these subcomponents is that if we now have a hero that does not use a subtitle, that's also working already, because you can just leave these components out. So you can just compose them in any way you would like. So the other thing that's still missing is the correct line height. And if we check, we see that they use a line height that's equal to the font size, so 80 pixels or 8 rem in our case. And the nice thing with Tailwind is that when you define a font size, you can also already define a line height that goes with that font size. So that way, if we set this font size, we don't need to also set the correct line height. So that's really nice. So we can add this in by converting the 5XL into an array where the second value is the line height. And instead of using 8 rem as well, I'm actually using a relative value, which is 1. So in this case, it's 1 times 8 rem. You could also make it 1.2 or 8, of course. But by using a number instead of a fixed pixel value, again, this scales as soon as someone zooms in or changes the font size of their browser, which is really, really good for accessibility. And if we check back, we see that this is indeed applied. And we also need to take the right line height for the 22 pixel text, which in this case is 22.6. So that means we do 28.6 divided by 22 is 1.3. And I actually saw that Tailwind wants us to provide this as a string instead of a number because I did get some really vague error. So let's use that for now. And the next step that also still needs to be added is adding some spacings. If we look here, we see that they use 24 pixel margins and also padding 10.4. And if we look at this H2, it has a margin bottom of 48 pixels. And if we quickly look throughout the rest of their website, for example, the margin this list item has, it's 24 pixels. Also, this top margin is 16 pixels. So it looks like all of the margins are in increments of 4. So I'm actually going to make a spacing scale that increments with 4 pixels. We can add this spacing scale to Tailwind as well by setting 0 to 0. Yeah, that's always a good thing. Then 1 will be 0.4 rem, 2 0.8. Copilot is so smart. That makes 3 12 pixels, yes, 4 16. And then at 5, we probably already go to 2.4 rem. 6 will be 32 pixels and 7 will be 40 pixels. And we leave it at that for now and see what we need later as well. So that means that we can add the spacing to our hero title by using a margin Y of 5, which we just defined equals 24 pixels. As well as add the bottom margin of 48 pixels to our subtitle, which is actually not 7, but 8, which we still need to add. And while we're at it, I'm already noticing that it's a bit harder to know what these values map to, because 4 times 8, of course, is not 48, but 32. So it's actually wise to add in all the different variants here as well. 6 times 4 is 24, and 7, 2.8, and then we have 8, 9 is 36 rem, 10 is 4 rem, 11 is 4.4, and 12 is 4.8 rem. So what I did now is I've added in the spacing object where I defined all of the different spacing variables in increments of 4 until the largest one I could find for now, which is 48 pixels. Perhaps it's smart if we later on remove any unused spacing variables, but because I don't have a design right now, I'm not sure what will be used and what not. Let's leave them in for now and see if we can later remove any unused variants. But it's really easy to have 12 mapped to 4.8 rem, because that way you can calculate 12 times 4 is 48, and you know what the value is without needing to look it up. So that's why I actually opted to have all these variants in here for now. So it's way easier to add to the page. So that means that we can now add the margin Y of 6, that's 24 pixels, and the margin bottom of 48, which is 12, to the subtitle. And let me also copy in this image already, so we have a little bit of height in the page before we start adding the header and the footer. I'll add this image into the public directory and then paste it in here. And for now, we can just reference this image with the pod image hero.webp. And this way, at least we already have something to scroll. And that's usually the first thing I want to have. This section doesn't need to be perfect right now, but this gives me something to scroll. And that's very handy when you are adding things like navigation and a footer. And that's what we're going to add next. So let's start by creating a header component where we export our header, which we will then import. And now we have arrived at this point. What we actually want to do is also move out all of the generic layout elements like header and footer, which are on every page, and move this to the layout component Next.js provides us with. And by doing that, we can even do some really cool animations down the line if you're changing pages, because the power of Next is that the header and the footer then stay always on the page when Next does a client-side transition to the next page. So that means that we can add some animations to the header as well, like I've showed in a previous video, which I linked up here as well. So to start with, that means that we copy all of the wrapping components of the page and add this around the children, remove it from here, and also the closing part, of course, and make sure to import all of the components we have just added. And then we're also immediately going to replace our header component with the new header component we have just created. All right, and then we're going to build a header. This header, of course, starts always with a logo, which we can copy from their website. I'm going to make a directory called icons, where I'm going to put all of the SVG icons we will use. Logo.tsx. And this is actually a really nice thing the Linear team did. They added in an area label to explain to visually impaired users what this SVG actually does, which is really nice of them. So, and as soon as we've added in that icon, we can import the logo from the icons pod, as well as add the linear text next to it, and wrap this in a link component provided by Next, and add a href to go back to the homepage. We also need to bring in our container to center all the content again. And then we're going to make this flex, so they're right next to each other. Items center to align the text in the middle. And then I'm also going to make this icon accept class names, so we can size it and give it a margin. So that means that there is a class name prop coming in, which is optionally and is a string. And that adds the class name to the component. And after we've done that, we can now pass a class name in here and say, for example, width for, height for, and add a margin right of 16 pixels for now. We now quickly check their website and see what the exact size of the logo is. Actually 18 pixels, which is not a size we have defined in our Tailwind config. And since that's probably not something that's used over and over, I am actually going to use arbitrary values for this. So instead of 4, we can use 80 pixels, or even better, 1.8 rem. And by doing that, we see that the logo is actually the right size. And now we have to find out the font sizes, 16 pixels, which we defined as the medium size. So let's also add that in here as well. And we already see that we have a nice logo type. Next is bringing in all these navigation items. It's best practice to wrap these in a nav element, because that's semantically the correct element to use. You're building a navigation to a certain place, so you use a nav element for this. And in there, we can create an ordered list with a list item that has all of the different anchors that we're going to link to. And of course, we should wrap all of them again in link components. But for now, they don't link anywhere yet. Okay, and of course, this should also be inline, and probably we want this container to be a flex container, so we can use that container to change the direction of our components. So that means that also our container should accept a class name, which again is optionally a string, and I should add a comma in here as well. And then we concatenate them together. And the nice package to actually do this for us is called class names. So let me quickly add that by running yarn add class names. We can add this function in, import class names from class names. And what you can do with class names is you can pass in a string, which are all the default classes you use, but you can also add in a variable, for example. And what class names then will do is it will concatenate all of them into one single string. So by doing that, we can now also add a class name and make it flex. So what you already saw is everything got put next to each other. And we can do the same thing for an ordered list to also make it a flex. So again, everything is next to each other. The next thing I want to check is the height of the navigation, which is 48 pixels. Probably later on, since navigation is fixed, we also need to have this as some sort of variable. So we can give the page an offset that's actually exactly the same. And with Tailwind, we can create some variables in the root in our global styles by adding root. And then we say navigation height equals 4.8 rem. And now we can use this variable inside our CSS by setting h and then navigation height. Oh, that should of course be var navigation height. Then we make this nav full height and add in here items center and also full height to center the navigation items within the text as well. Let's quickly check the font size as well of the anchors. That is 14 pixels. So that's still a smaller size we need to add. So that's small, 1.4 rem. And instead of adding a class name to all of our anchors, which for now would be quite repetitive, perhaps later on this will be an array we will iterate through. But for now, we can also use arbitrary values again in Tailwind. And we can say and_anchor text small. And by doing that, all of the anchors are targeted that are inside this unordered list, but just with Tailwind. Magic, right? And there was also a margin in between all of the navigation items, which is 24 pixels. So we can do that also with the arbitrary values by targeting the list item and give them a margin left of 6. Nice. Next step is making this header also stick to the top by making it fixed. Top 0 and left also 0, width full. So this way it spans the full width and is attached in the top left corner. And here already you see what I predicted before. The main content is now going up the 48 pixels that the height of the navigation is because this thing became fixed. So what we can do to fix that is add a padding top to our main element in the layout that equals the variable navigation height. And with that, this main navigation item starts exactly under the navigation. So the next step is also adding in the border that is at the bottom of the navigation, which is a 1 pixel line that's actually white with an opacity. I'm gonna add this color in the theme for now, and let's see later if it's really a reusable thing. I will call that for now white A0.8, where the A0.8 stands for the opacity of 0.08. So that means that if we now go back to our header, we can say border bottom and border white alpha 0.8. And with that, we have a line that's barely visible, but it's all about these details, right? As soon as we add in the gradient that's also in the background and everything, it will probably be a bit more visible. Next thing missing from the menu is the buttons on the right side. Let's wrap them in a div, which, yeah, nice. Copilot has a link that's a login and a button that we still have to create. First, we add a class name in here and give it a margin left of auto, which will push them to the right. Also make it H full, flags and items center again to have the navigation also line up in the center. And let's make sure to add the text small to this link and probably a same margin right of 6. After that, we also need to make the button component because that's also part of the header. So we're creating a new component called button.tsx. This button for now only returns an anchor because every button I see on the page is actually an anchor linking to a different page. So perhaps towards the future, it should also become a real button, depending on the action the button does, of course. But let's keep it easy for now and stick with an anchor. And also we use children and not a string as the button text, because this way we can later on always, for example, insert an icon as a child as well. And we actually need to take this interface out and create a new interface, because we also need to add in the href, so we can add the href to the link as well. And then we already replaced this button with our own button, so we already can see what we're building. And now comes the fun part, and that is actually building this button, which is a button that has quite a few variants, because I see a button here and here, but they're different in size, so probably there's a size difference. And actually this thing could also be a button, but then again, even smaller. And if we scroll down, we again see that very small button. So this is definitely also a button variant we will have to create. And here also I see a different version of the button that looks quite similar, but has a different color. So a new tool I would like to use for this is called Class Variant Authority, about which I also created a new video recently. And with Class Variant Authority, or CVA in short, you can make it a lot more structured when you're defining multiple variants of the same component. So let's install that first by running yarn add class variants authority. And then we can import CVA from class variants authority. And then we create our own consts, button classes equals CVA, where the first argument is the default button class names, which we don't know about yet. And the second is an object where you define all your variants. The first variant should probably be called variant, I think. CVA uses intent for this, but I actually like having a prop called variant is primary or variant is secondary. So let's make a prop variant in which we have a primary and a secondary. And for the lack of better naming for now, a tertiary as well, which is the gray button. What we can do then is copy this button classes and add this as a class name in here and execute that function. We can import variant props from CVA as well, and then extend our button props with a variant props type of button classes. And it should be extends with an S. And what this does is it will automatically add the types that are extracted from CVA to valid button props as well. So that means that we can now extract the variant and pass this variant to CVA. Again, if you're not sure what I'm doing here, check the video I linked a few seconds ago, because that explains this in detail. Also, like we said, there's probably 3 different sizes. There is a large, medium, and probably a small button for this gray version. So that means that there is another variant, which is small, medium, and large. And that also means that we need to destructure the size and pass it to the button classes function as well. And then we can actually start adding some class names in there. First start with the font size. That's 14 pixels for the medium variant. So that is text small. For the small button, this is 13 pixels, which is then a new font size we still need to add, which is probably our extra small variant, 1.3. So text extra small. And for the large button, we have a font size of 16 pixels. So text medium. Then we have our primary button, which we are styling now. That has a gradient in the background, which we are just gonna copy for now. And the easiest way to add this gradient to Tailwind is actually by adding a custom variant to our config by adding background image. And then for now, we will call this primary gradient, where we can just paste in this gradient. That enables us to add BG primary gradient as a class now. And if we look at our button, we still don't see anything. And that's of course because we don't pass in the variant is primary. If we do that, we see that the gradient pops up. And actually, I want to change this around quickly because I think that the primary button should actually be the default. And we can make that the default by adding this variant primary as the default variant. And I think we should do the same for size medium. Nice. Next is making sure that they're all rounded. It seems for now that it applies to all of them. So they're all rounded to full, which makes them rounded. Then we need to take out the padding. That's 16 pixels on the x-axis for the medium button. So px4. For the large button, that's 24. So that makes px of 6. And for the small button, that's 12. So that is a padding x of 3. And then we have the height of the button, which should be 32 pixels. So it's always wise to make that a min height, because if somehow there's a lot of content in there, you want the button to grow with it, of course. So that's h times 4, 32 divided by 4 is 32 divided by 4 is 8. Yes, 8, 32. So h of 8. Small button is 28, so that is 7. h7. And the large button has a height of 48, so that's h12. Okay, yeah, we indeed need to make our button inline flex probably, because it should be an inline item. Otherwise, it will always wrap to a new line because it's a block item if we would make it flex. Okay, and then items center to have the text in the middle again. And by doing that, we already have a button that's quite similar to the design. We will work on all the other buttons as soon as we need them. So for now, we're going to leave it at this, because I first want to wrap up this header before starting to work on all of these different other components. Of course, when you are just starting out a project, you have no components at all. So you need to work at a few different things at once. But after that, we really should focus on one component. So the main thing the navigation still lacks is the glossy texture in the background, like you see here in their design as well. And for that, they used a pretty nifty solution to do this. They added a backdrop filter, blur, which blurs everything that is behind the navigation. So that's what gives it this glossy texture. They also added a mask image, I see, but I'm gonna pretend I didn't see it because I'm not sure yet what that will add. So we'll leave that out for now until we notice a difference between their website and our website. They also added it into a separate div that doesn't do anything besides adding this background effect instead of directly on the header component. This is also something that I'm gonna ignore for now because I did not see this. I'm only replicating the design. And I'm not a big fan of having useless HTML elements that only add styling. So if we can get away without this, let's do that. So Tailwind actually makes it pretty easy to add a backdrop blur filter where we can add 12 pixels as a value. And you see if we scroll anything behind it, that we already have this super nice gloss textured effect. Now let's also add the hover state for the anchors, which if we inspect this anchor, activate the hover state, we see that it has a gray color. Let's copy that in. And for now, since it's the only gray we have, I will add it as gray. And then we go back to our header component and add the color to the anchor. And anchor hover text gray. And with that, you already see that we have a hover state, but no nice animation yet, which we can add in by adding in transition color on the anchor as well. And with that, we have a nice hover transition. The only thing that still lacks a nice hover transition is the primary button. So let's see how that should look as well. They seem to add some shadow in there. There's a text shadow and a box shadow. However, Tailwind does not support text shadows right now. You have to add them either via arbitrary values or by creating your own utility. And that's actually what I'm going to do now. You can add that by going to your globals and then extend the utilities layer by adding .text shadow for now. I'm not going to make this dynamic in any way because I'm not sure in what way we're going to use this in the future. So in there we add the text shadow, and for the box shadow, this is actually a property that Tailwind supports in their config. So we can just add that to our Tailwind config by going to box shadow, and then I'm going to call this primary again because this seems to be only used with the primary button for now. And after we've added those two, we can go back to our button and add the hover classes. So that gives us hover text shadow and hover box shadow primary. And if we now hover our button, we see that both the text shadow as well as the box shadow are added. So that seems for now to wrap up the desktop version of the navigation at least. Let's see how they made this responsive. So it seems that they're okay with dropping a few main navigation items towards tablet. And when you're going really small to mobile, there's a hamburger menu that will appear. Whereas both the login and sign up button will always stay visible. So let's see if we can replicate that next. Hiding a few navigation items is pretty straightforward with Tailwind. Let's see which actually disappear. Features, method, pricing, and company should stay. So these three will get hidden. And we can do that by adding class name of hidden and then make them block on medium. And when we then resize, we see something happen I did not expect. What's happening here is that we forgot to add a meta tag that prevents things from scaling down. So what we need to do is go back to our layouts file and add this meta tag to our head, which actually makes sure that the viewport always stays equal to the device width and nothing will scale down. By doing that again, we see that we actually drop off the menu items, but not at the correct breakpoint. And that is because we added the medium breakpoint and should have added the large breakpoint, which is the beginning of desktop. What you also see is that the full navigation extends until the full size of the window. And that is because our container does not have a padding yet, which is needed to keep the space on the side. It seems like they use 32 pixels as their page padding. So we can add a padding of X with a value of 8. And that will also make sure that everything is nicely within the boundaries of the page. So let's now make the next breakpoint where we hide the menu items behind the hamburger menu. And we do that by adding hidden to the navigation as well and making it block from medium probably. So that hides it as soon as we go any smaller. And then we of course need a hamburger button to be able to toggle that navigation. So let's first pull in their hamburger icon, and then we add our own button with the hamburger icon. And what's also important if you're adding a button that only has an icon is to make sure that you add a screen reader label, because this way screen readers will read that text, but users will not see it. And you can easily do that by adding the class name as our only. This way the text is hidden. We inspect this, but it is still in the DOM, making it so that screen readers will read this text to the user. This button also needs to have a margin left. And of course, we still need to do something when you click this button. So let's add a state to keep track whether this button is open or not. Oh, and because we are now using React server components, we also need to tell React that this should also run on the client by adding use client at the top of our file, because everything that runs state or has any other, for example, context or effects needs to run on the client, which requires you to add use client. And then on click of this anchor, we need to run a function to set the hamburger is open to the opposite value it currently has. And with that, we also need to add in the class names again. So we can dynamically add the class name to toggle this navigation on mobile. So instead of now always being hidden, we actually need to make this conditionally based on whether the hamburger is open. So if it's open, we don't need to render anything because block is the default, and only otherwise it will be hidden. So if we now click, we see that our menu comes back, although it squeezes back in the place where it was before, because of course we did not add any additional styles for that. So we can do that by making it fixed and then have a top offset that's equal to the height of the navigation and the left of 0. That way it already drops down. And I'm also getting a little bit annoyed right now with having to repeat this navigation height. So Tailwind lets you also use custom values that are based on a CSS variable, for example, by extending this object with spacings. So we could in here also add navigation height, which equals the variable navigation height. And with that, we can now, instead of use the variable, just say top navigation height, and it still keeps the same position. So that means that we can replace any place where we before used this navigation height, which was only here, navigation height. Okay, let's get back to this navigation again. The navigation also should be full width, of course, and we make it for now background white so we can't really see what it does. And instead of full height, it should actually be the height of the screen minus the top navigation height. So we can use calc for this, 100 VH minus var navigation height. This way it extends the full extent of the page, and it should have an overflow auto. So it scrolls if there's too much content in there. Okay, let's remove the white background again and actually add in the correct color, which seems to be our background color we are already using. We can say background. And next we also see that, of course, the navigation items should switch directions, so they become flex call, and on tablet become a flex row again, which of course we need to fix in a second because we're now making mobile. We're a little bit undoing our work for desktop, and the item center also only applies from medium and up. As for the font sizes, I also see that they're actually 16 pixels on mobile. So we can make them text medium, and on the medium size and up, we can make them text small again, as well as that all of the anchors are a full width and are the height of the navigation height. That's interesting that they reuse this variable, but that makes it more consistent probably. Now this line is getting pretty long. What I'm actually gonna do is move this over multiple lines by taking out all of the anchor styles and putting them on their own line, just so it's a little bit better to see. Apart from that, it does not add any functionality. So this anchor should then be height of navigation height, and it should also be full width. And in order for that to work, it should be a block element. Okay, it looks good. And while I'm looking at it, I also see that on mobile, all these navigation items become visible again. So instead of making them always hidden, we should make them hidden on medium and up. That brings them back. And all of the anchors text should be aligned in the middle. So instead of making them block, we make them flex. And then we can say items center to align the text in the middle. The next thing missing is this nice divider between the anchor elements, which is of a color we don't have yet. So let's add that in as well. For now, perhaps as a gray dark. I'm not a huge fan of having these dark and light colors, but for now I'm still unsure how many different variants of the color we are going to use. So making it gray 20, for example, it's also still really abstract because chances are big I need to add something in between. So normally you would have a design where you can already take all of the colors from before you start, but now this is how we're going to do it. Okay, and that means that this list item gets a border bottom, and that border should be of color gray dark. And with that, we already see we have a nice line. And now we have some more navigation items. We can also test, and it does, whether our overflow scroll works. Because most of the time we are working on these large screens and we can see all the navigation items, but our users might have a smaller device. And we then just tend to forget to test if the scroll bar functionality also works, or even forget to add it in at all. Okay, so this works. Now we go back to desktop, and that's broken, of course. And that is because we need to reset a few properties now, which we have set for the navigation. So of course, it should not be fixed, but it should be relative again on desktop. It should not have a top offset, top 0, and it should be of height auto and also of width auto. And the background color should also be transparent, which is a color we did not add in yet. So let's do that right away. And finally, the list item also should not have a border. And with that, we suddenly have a navigation that's almost working. We need to hide the hamburger, of course, on desktop. So it's hidden from medium and up, and then it pops up as soon as you go smaller. That's correct. And what's also always really interesting to test is what happens if we open the navigation and now go back. That seems fine. And if we close it again and open the navigation, then still everything seems fine. So that's good. Sometimes what happens, especially if you use a lot of JavaScript to render also all these classes, is that some of these classes keep sticking around when going from mobile view, opening navigation back to desktop, which just keeps your navigation in a broken state. So it's always good to test this as well. The only thing this still lacks is some nice animations. These little details. I love it. If we take a look at Linear's website, we see that when you open the mobile navigation, the items fade in and slightly move up from the bottom to the top. If we want to replicate that, we have to animate the opacity of the navigation. And animating the opacity is not possible if you at the same time toggle an element from display none to display block. So the first thing we need to do is, instead of making it hidden, we need to make it invisible, which sets visibility to hidden. And as soon as the navigation is open, set it to visible. That should still have the exact same behavior, but the benefit now is that we can animate opacity while changing it from invisible or hidden to visible. Since the opacity should not animate on tablet and up, we're already adding opacity 100 for any medium devices. And for mobile, we can now add opacity 100 when it's visible and opacity 0 when it's invisible. And if we combine that with a transition opacity and add a duration of 500 to that, we already see that the items are now fading in. They are, however, not fading out if you look closely. And that is because it's set to invisible before the animation can even run, since that's something that happens instantly. We can actually fix that by adding an animation delay to the visibility property. However, it's not possible to add a different transition delay for invisible and do not have a transition delay for opacity. So to fix this, we need to add a wrapper around our navigation that does the toggling of the visibility. And then we actually take out the dynamic class names and put that on our new wrapper div. That means that we don't need class names anymore for the nav. And with that, we can add a delay of 500 to the invisible and also add transition visibility as a default that's always set on this div. Oh, and by accident, I copied the opacity change as well. That should actually remain on the nav. So we have to add the class names in again, because this is still an animation that happens on the child. And if we now add back in the delay, we see that we actually have a nice animation, both fading in and fading out. The only thing missing now is the anchors also animating up, So that means that we add a translate y of 8, for example, and that we should also add a transition to the transform. And we actually already added a transition for the colors, and it's not possible to combine them by adding two classes. What you actually need to do is add an arbitrary value where you specify the color that should transition as well as the transform. And now it will combine them both. And of course, this translate y should not apply when we are on a tablet device and larger. And we should add in the class names to, as soon as the hamburger is open, change this translate y to 0. And as soon as we do that, we see that we have an animation with all the links fading in and moving up. It's only just a little bit too small still. So we can fix that by changing the animation duration, by again setting that on this anchor and changing the duration to 300, for example. And that looks already super smooth. The biggest difference you still see when playing around with the real linear website is that they have added custom easings as well. We can specify one that's pretty similar to what linear uses by adding ease in as an easing timing function. If we now go back to a tablet and desktop variants, we see actually that our menu item is not shown anymore, and that's because we add the invisible property. So we should also add in the medium visible to make sure that from medium and up, our navigation is always visible. And with that, we finished most of our navigation. So as the final thing in this video, I want to add the footer as well. So that means our page has a start and an end. And then in the next video, we can actually work on all the nice things in between. So let's first close all of these files, which we probably don't need for now, and create a new component called footer. This returns an element that is a footer, and then we add the text. This is the footer back in. And the next step is replacing this footer in our main layout. And by the way, also adding in our container again, so our text is centered. Looking at Linear's website, it seems like there is again a border on the top of the footer, and that border is almost similar to the 0.08 wide we had before. So I will actually take that value for now and see if the 0.1 is a value that's used more throughout the website, or perhaps it's just an inconsistency in design. And in my opinion, it's then up to us as front-end engineers to make the design a bit more consistent as well. So we first add the border top and then set the border color as white alpha 08. And there's also probably a padding, yes, that this div has, which is 56 pixels. 56 is actually a value that we don't have yet in our Tailwind config, but for now I will leave it like that and see again if this is used more often. So this has then a padding Y of 56 pixels, which is 5.6 REM. Should not forget about that. And for now, I will also add a little margin to the top of the footer, which later on probably will be part of another component, but we'll change that along the way. So let's add margin top 12 and actually change the border top to border T, which is the right class name. And then let's see what the font sizes they use in the footer as well. All of the links seem to be 17 pixels. Same goes for the headings, as well as the title on the left side. So looking at our Tailwind config, that mapped to small. So let's already add the text small on there as well. And next we'll create the structure of the navigation. It is actually divided into two different columns. The first one has the logo and the second column has the navigation links. And the reason why I say it's two different columns is because I saw already what happened on mobile, and that is if you make this smaller, the full left side will actually get moved on the top. And if we create this in two columns, we can easily later on move it as a column underneath each other instead of next to each other. So let's first create an array for all of the different links we have, so we don't need to repeat ourselves 5,000 times. So it creates a new array of footer links. In there, we have a title, which has product, and we have links, which also have a title. in this case called features, with a href that for now links to a hash, and let's in the rest as well. And with that, we have a few arrays of links with all the titles that are for each of the column as well. So I'm going to collapse this for now. And then we're actually going to render all of the footer links and map them, which gives us a column. And inside that column, we are going to render an h3 with the column.title. And then we're also going to render an unordered list where we map over each of the links as a list item and a link in there. And that already gives us all of the links we need. The second thing is also making sure that we have this left column where we have to add the logo again, as well as text. And at the bottom, we do have social links in a second. So first, we're gonna make this display flex, so everything gets put next to each other again. And then we're gonna see if this column has a fixed width. No, it does not. Actually, it is the linked columns that do have a fixed width. So that means that we can add a justify between, which pushes both of the columns to the sides. And if we then now make this wrapper of the footer links also display flex, that will make that a column as well. And then of course we need to wrap every column in a div instead of in a fragment. So the title and the link list stay underneath each other. Let's get the right font settings. So it's color white. It has a font weight of 500. So that makes it font medium, as well as a margin bottom of actually 3.5 because it's 14. So we stick with 3 for now to have it more consistent. And the columns also have a min width of 180 or 80 rem. The anchors itself, they have a gray color, which is actually the gray we already defined in our config. So we can add a class name of text gray and also add a margin bottom probably, yes, of 14 pixels. So we make that 12 again. And in order to get that to work, all of the anchors should be display block. And with that, we already have all of the footer links styled as the real website. Next is getting the right size from the logo again, which is 18 pixels. So we can add a class name on here and make it width 4 and height 4, which is 16 pixels, but okay, for now that's close enough. And we also should add the gray color to the text and make sure that both of the columns are next to each other. Oh, that should actually not be this column, but it should be this column. Also add a margin right of 4. And for the social links, if we add margin top of auto and make sure that the wrapper div is flex, a flex column and height full. And finally add one more wrapper div around this column. So it will stretch everything to the full height. You see that it pushes the social links down as well. And one thing that you already notice is that the links are actually not fully aligned because the last anchor should not have a bottom margin. So we should say that we want to select the anchor inside of this list item, which is the last, and that should get a margin bottom of 0. So let's quickly copy in the social icons as well, and then show them in this wrapper div. And make sure that they're all put next to each other and have a space on the x-axis of 2, perhaps 3, and give them the text gray color. Nice. They actually have a larger margin, as you can see. Margin left of 24, so that's x4. And I also noticed that the text and the logo is aligned in the center, and we did not properly align that yet. So let's also quickly fix that. Items center. That's way better. So the only thing left now is making sure that this is responsive as well. So let's see. Seems that they make this a flex column. And then from medium and up, it will be a flex row. Cool. And the logo row will be a flex row then. And from large, it will be a flex column. And it will justify between to put the space between them. And it also has a margin at the bottom, probably. It does, at least spacing somewhere. Yeah, all of the columns have a margin top of 40 pixels. Okay, so we can add that here, which is margin top of 10. And on large, it doesn't have a margin top then. And they go to 2 columns as well, already directly on the breakpoint towards tablet, which gives them a width of 50%. So that means that we have a min width of 50%, and from large, the min width is 180 pixels. And then we also need to add flex wrap to have it wrap to the next line. And with that, I think we also finished the footer. Super nice. So this also wraps up the very first part of rebuilding Linear's website. I hope you found this very useful and that you learned a lot from it. This was only the first part in this series because, as you can see, we're far from done. Please make sure to subscribe and leave a like below, because next week we'll be releasing the second part of this video where we start on building all of the different components on the homepage, starting from the header and going down from top to bottom. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.